Hey everyone! This virtual PD will help you understand how Flipgrid can be used in the classroom to support teaching and learning. Flipgrid's an excellent tool that can be utilized in the classroom in a variety of ways. It can be used as a reflection tool, a summarization tool, for formative assessment, or for collaboration and discussion, and obviously it's a great tool if you want to flip your classroom. I'm going to start by showing you how to set up a Flipgrid. You're going to start by creating your account, then you're going to create grids. In the upper grades, you may want to make a grid for each class. Lower grades, you might consider grids for each topic or content area. You might have a grid for history and a grid for science. It can be divided up in several different ways. Once you get started, you'll have a better idea for how it works. Then you add your topics. Your topics are the engagement pieces or the assignments, so to speak, that the students or learners will utilize in order to engage with each other. And the entire purpose of Flipgrid seems to be that it gives every student a voice. So instead of responding to a discussion board, the students get to speak. They get to see themselves, they get to see each other and engage with each other in that way. This is the first screen that will come up when you create an account on Flipgrid. So creating an account is pretty intuitive. Once you make your account, this is what your screen will look like. And the first thing you'll want to do is create a grid. So you can make as many grids as you would like. I personally teach upper grade, so I like to have a grid for each class. So I have a grid for first period, a grid for second period. In the lower grades, you might make a grid for different subject areas, or you might just have one grid for your whole class. We'll just call it science. There are a few different ways you can get your students or learners onto this grid. You've got a flip code at the bottom. You can do it through email or student IDs. I'm going to click student ID, and then I'm going to click next. So when I want to add students or learners to this grid, I like this ID function because I can just put their names in, and then it asks for a student ID. This is just an identifier so that when they go to log in, they can make sure that they're logged in as themselves. And this is unique to the grid, so it doesn't have to be any fancy ID. I usually just use the student's first name. So I'm going to add 2 students to this class. And if you were using this grid for, say, your first period class or a group of students, you can enter all those students here and give them their student ID, which again, I usually just use their first name. When I click next, this shows my Flipgrid portal. So this is the grid that I just created. And when I'm ready for my students to look at the grid, they will just need this flip code. I can share it as a QR code. I can share a link with them. I find it easiest just to have them go to flipgrid.com and enter the flip code, which is branch 2723, or they can type in flipgrid.com/branch 2723. So let's show what that looks like. Flipgrid.com/branch 2723. And it will ask for their student identifier. So I'm going to enter John's name. And so every student will just enter their name and click Let's Go. And this is what it looks like for the student. Now I haven't added any topics, but I'm going to go add a topic. So I'm back on the teacher portal. This is my login. And if I click on this grid, and again, a grid is kind of like your classroom or your group of learners, I can click Add Topic. And adding a topic is how I kind of create an assignment. So for this example, I'm going to do an exit ticket on the water cycle. And I can use this as a sort of formative assessment. We'll talk about several different ways that you can utilize Flipgrid for different assignments or assessments, but we're going to use this as a ticket out the door to make sure they understand the water cycle. So their prompt may be, explain the importance of the water cycle in one sentence. So I'm limiting them to one sentence, so I'll probably limit their time. Right here you can choose the amount of recording time that they can have, and it is dependent on your assignment. But for the most part, this is intended to be quick responses. So there is a 5-minute maximum. So once you have given your topic a title, a recording time, and a prompt, and the prompt is just where you explain what you want them to do, what you want them to respond to or say. So some of the examples we'll talk about in a little bit. This is a place they can summarize, they can reflect, they can debate. Then you come down here and you can add some content or some media. Sometimes I use this to flip my classroom and I'll record a video I want them to respond to if it's a current event or something happening in the news. You can upload an image. For this one, I could also upload my lecture on the water cycle if I wanted to record myself or record pieces of it. The video recording is limited to a short amount of time, so you couldn't do an entire long lecture. If I don't have any specific content or media that I want to add, which is often the case when it's just a ticket out the door, I'll add a picture or an emoji. So for this, we'll just say water, just to give a little something for the kids to look at. And that'll come up on their screen when they pull up this topic. There is a button at the bottom that says more options. There's some places you can add more content down here. And then there is this topic status. This is a really useful piece. You can have your videos moderated, which means when the students respond, you can preview them before the entire class can see them. So if this is not clicked, then as soon as the student responds, anybody who is in that grid can see their video immediately. So if you want to make sure that you can preview the videos before the other students can view them, you can click this. I find that this is helpful if I really want to use this for formative assessment so that they're not watching someone else's video and repeating what they say. If I really want to hear what they have to say. If we're doing a debate or discussion, sometimes I won't click this as long as it's a group of students that I know are going to take the assignment seriously. This is another useful piece right here. You can freeze the topic so they only have a certain amount of time to respond, or if there have been a lot of responses and it's time to close out that topic, you can click frozen. You can click hidden and it won't even be viewable on their grid. I'm going to leave this active for now. There's also an option to set when it cuts off. So if you want students to respond to a particular current event article or news video clip by Thursday or something, you can come on here and choose an end date, and after that they cannot respond anymore. There's some other settings down here at the bottom. I always leave video editing on. The students like to trim and rearrange their video clips to really control what they're putting in there and try to leave a good piece of media. They can add titles, attachments. I do turn it where students can like each other's videos typically. I think that's kind of a unique piece. And then there are some other settings down here. I'm going to click Create Topic. And now here's the link for this particular topic, which I can post to my class webpage, or I can post a QR code. I usually just have my students bookmark the Flipgrid for the class so that I don't have to post every time, but you have these options here. You can send it, you can share it with them on Remind, which is how I share it initially when we start the year. I share the grid on Remind because I use Remind with my classroom. So there's a lot of functionality with using this with other apps, which we'll talk a bit more about later. When I click all set, this is what I see on my screen. So there's really not anything here to see because no students have responded yet. But if I want to see what it looks like from a student screen, I had already logged into the grid as John Cox. So this is what a student would see. The name of the grid, so it may say first period or science class or Mrs. Branch's class. And then here is the current grid that's being assigned. Any old grids will be down below. And this has a place right here. This big plus sign is what students click in order to start their response. And if it's not moderated, which means that it goes immediately to the grid after the student posts it, it won't say moderated right here. So this lets them know that the teacher is going to screen it before it comes up on the grid. So the student would just click this and it opens up the camera and they can start recording. So let's talk about how you can use Flipgrid to support your classroom. This is just a short list of ways that Flipgrid can be used. You would use different topics for different assignments or assessments. One way that I use Flipgrid very regularly is for a flipped classroom. I will record myself giving a very brief 3-4 minute lecture or explanation and then have students respond to a prompt or a couple of questions at the end to show me that they did this for homework so that they're ready for what we do in class the next day. That way when we're in class, I don't have to spend a bunch of time standing in front lecturing. We can be engaging and doing different activities and labs, working together and doing more collaborative work. So the benefits of a flipped classroom are fantastic, and this is a really great way to post videos for a flipped classroom without having to make a YouTube video. And it gives a place for students to respond quickly and easily. Formative assessment, almost any of these you could consider formative assessment. I love to do exit tickets with Flipgrid. One-sentence summaries are a great exit ticket. I used to do them all the time on Post-it notes or index cards. Using Flipgrid for one-sentence summaries is great. I usually moderate these so they can't just repeat what someone else said if they're not feeling confident. We can talk about it, and that way I'm really getting some assessment of what they know, but then I do moderate them so they can see each other's later. Summarizing for understanding. Sometimes we'll do a short reading, or they may read a current event, and they can summarize it on Flipgrid quickly. End of unit summaries are really interesting to see what the students grasped the most, what they enjoyed the most, and reflections are the same sort of thing. Debates and discussions are a great way to use Flipgrid because the students can respond to each other. I love to ask questions that there's more than one answer to and see what the students think and how they give each other constructive responses. So that's one where you will really see a lot of students replying to each other's initial responses to the grid. Explain your answer is great, especially in math. In math, you could have them explain how they got to an answer. This is where you may have them get a small whiteboard and even draw or write how they got to that answer. And again, they can respond to each other. So if they see that they did it differently than someone else, they can reply to someone else's response, another classmate's response, and explain how they did it differently. It's a great way to see different perspectives. All of these are great ways to see different perspectives. Students can give short biographies. And then I already mentioned current events or any other inquiry-based article. This is a great way for them to reflect. Instead of writing a few sentences about what you learned or what you thought, they can just record themselves. And then finally, app smashing. So app smashing is a really cool way to use some of the other apps that are available with regards to creating media or reviewing material and use them with Flipgrid. Students seem to really enjoy making their own media, editing pictures and videos, and this is a cool way for them to use some of those other apps to make their videos that they put on Flipgrid or that you can use when you put videos on Flipgrid. So if you are creating some sort of media for students to view, you can then upload that to Flipgrid, and that gives you a portal to share that with your students so that you're not just posting YouTube links or files. It gives them a place to engage with whatever you're posting. So if you just post something as a file or as a YouTube video, then it's a little bit harder for them to respond or get involved in a discussion. Flipgrid gives them the chance to discuss. So the upload a video icon on Flipgrid is really useful if you're going to be using app smashing as the teacher. And when you create your own videos, this is what you'll click when you're adding your videos to a topic. So this is just a really unique way to utilize Flipgrid even more. Now, what's cool about Flipgrid too is you can create your own topics for your grids using all the different apps that I shared with App Smashing, using the different types of assessments, assignments, engagement. But when you're on Flipgrid, you can also find topics that have already been created. So if you go to Disco Library and you scroll down, you can look for topics without having to make your own. You can filter by age, subject, topic goals. So I'm going to filter for middle school students, and I'm going to filter for engineering. And this gives me some examples. So this could be a really great way to introduce a unit, to get them engaged and thinking about innovative ways to connect with their content. And then you can click on these and add them to your grid. So my grid was titled Science, that was my class, and I can click Add, and it will give me the option to edit it. So I can change what the prompt is, I can add more information or more content, so I can edit it any way that I would a topic that I had created. And then I can just assign it to my class, and my students can engage with that particular, in this case it's a brain pop video, without me having to create the media myself. So sometimes this is a really useful tool if you want to find something quickly on a topic for students. And you can search topics too. Since we did water cycle, let's see what we can find. So here are some topics that have already been made about the water cycle, and I could add these as an engagement piece on Flipgrid. You can also add your topics to the Disco library. So let's go back to my grid. And I've added this engineering design process topic to my classroom. So using that Disco library is really helpful too as you're deciding how to use Flipgrid with your students. I think the most important piece to take away from how to use Flipgrid with your students is it really allows you as the instructor and your students to utilize the 4 C's: critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity all in one portal. I hope this has been very helpful.